It's Mom and Pop Video Shop.
Hello and welcome to another Mom and Pop Video Shop interview. We have a special guest, and honestly, like a nostalgia bomb for yours truly. We have the one and only Michael Gingold of Fangoria fame. Like that, like literally, I have known your name since I was like in 7th or 8th grade, which is, I'm sure, not weird at all for you.
Well, I get that a lot. It just makes me feel a little old. That's all.
Yeah, well, yeah. I felt old when I was teaching, and I made an Alf reference, and the kids had no idea what I was talking about. That's when I felt old.
That happens all that. I talk to people who are 20 years younger than me about stuff from the 80s, and sometimes they just don't know what that is. So
yeah. It's very when you have that moment, you realize there's adults around you that have never known the 20th century.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean we're at that point now where we have adult people who what you said. Sure.
Yeah, I'll make references and jokes, and then my wife, I can tell now, we've been together long enough that I can tell the difference between her genuine laughs and her pity laughs. And I can always tell like if she gives me one of those giggles, and I'll just look at her, babe, you don't get my joke at all, do you? She's like, no, but she's like, I'm sure Joel would think it's funny.
Yes, exactly. All right, so we are here, Michael, not just to wax poetic about the old days of Fango, but to talk to you about your upcoming documentary project that Jenna I reached out and said that this is something that y'all were working on, and it's called Slasher Trash, and I'm going to kick it over to you and have you you pitch it, because I can confirm that I have also just ordered it. So
cool. Thank you. It's going to be about a 4-hour documentary about the slasher genre, focusing on kind of the post-Halloween years of the late 70s and the 80s, when these movies just proliferated, when we are going to cover some of the earlier stuff a bit, like Black Christmas and things like that. But the real focus is on the explosion of these kind of movies that came out starting in 79 and continuing through the 80s after Halloween was such a big success. And you had major studios doing them. You had people in their backyards doing them. They ran the spectrum. So we're not going to focus on the franchises everyone knows, the household names like Jason, Freddy, and Michael, but the ones that existed kind of below that. Not that that's a qualitative description, but just the stuff like, we do have major studio movies in there, right down through the shot on video stuff. There's just such a wide gamut. And it's interesting because I'm working on this with Gareth Slasher Trash Morgan, who runs the Facebook page Slasher Trash or community. And, that's kind of where this all got started. And I think he may know even more about these than I do, because as we've been going through this, they've come up with titles that even I haven't seen. I mean, there's so many of these things. I don't think anyone could have kept up with them in the 80s, even though at the time I went to see as many of them as I could in theaters and rented them on VHS. So we're just going to cover the whole spectrum, and we're going to kind of celebrate the fun of them and how crazy and outrageous they were, and also the fact that they were kind of controversial and kind of took a lot of heat at the time, where now they're cult films. They have followings decades after they were made. These little movies are getting resurrected in many cases by these boutique Blu-ray labels and getting cleaned up and looking better than they ever have. So we're just going to cover the entire spectrum of that, like I said, late 70s, 80s slasher trend. We're not going to get into the Scream stuff. That's a whole different subject, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, I read your book ad nauseum. I know there's 2 of them, right? But I know I've read the first one.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so I know that your breadth of knowledge, and also just from all your work with Fango, I know your breadth of knowledge with this subject. For those that don't, though, what is it about you that made this particular subject so appealing?
Well, I guess basically because I was around back then. I have a lot of friends who are not around in the 80s. They're maybe 15 years younger than I am. They kind of came of age watching these movies on video. I got to see quite a few of them in the theaters. Like I can still remember seeing Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2 in a theater. And not a revival, just like a regular run. It opened for a week in the New York area. So I experienced a lot of these things firsthand. I kind of saw the trend build up as it went along and then kind of die out. And but again, there are some of these that I haven't seen. And so it's been kind of a discovery process for me, finding a few of these things that even I was unaware of. So we're all kind of, this whole group, including Daniel Richardson, our other producer, we're all kind of in this together, kind of digging up all these great old movies and some not so great, but that are a lot of fun, and just celebrating the whole spectrum of them.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I would say, because you brought up like the big sort of the big, I don't know if we should say the big four, but the sort of the slasher icons that drove, I'm sure Fangoria sales every time you throw Freddy on a cover, boom, that issue's
the thing. Yeah, and in fact in the mid to late 80s, that's when a lot of our competitors started coming out at Fango, because any magazine with Freddy on the cover would sell. So we had a bunch of other horror magazines come out, but Fango outlasted them all. So that was cool.
Yeah, and I feel like because I mean, I'm a little younger than you, but I remember the '80s well, but I think I was a little bit too young to get to see any of these in the theater. Right. And so for me, it was a lot of rentals, and my friends. My mom didn't want me to see it. My dad, they were divorced because it was the '80s, so you had to be. And so my dad didn't care, so I could rent what I wanted. My cousin, 5 years older than me, he's the one that introduced me to Friday the 13th and everything else. And I have an appreciation, but I always feel like when it comes to slashers, especially, I feel like in the horror world, I'm a bit of a normie. Whereas Tyson, my buddy here, is actually younger than I am, but he is definitely much more of a slasher aficionado.
I had much worse parents.
Yeah, his parents had when he's like 5 years old, they're like, whatever.
Well, no, I was lucky enough to grow up in a small town where all we had was the mom and pop video shop. Even when the days of Blockbuster and the big chains arrived, I would have had to driven an hour to get to a Blockbuster. So I grew up in the small video store kind of thing. And my family owned the only grocery store in town. So I was also lucky enough that once a month I could pick up an issue of Fango, and I didn't pay for it. So I feel like you didn't get paid as much as you should have, Michael, because I was taking stuff off the shelf in my grandfather's grocery store and sneaking about the back so that
that's what happened.
No, but slashes are definitely my kind of my bread and butter. But I'll admit, man, I was as Joel called it, I was a normie for the longest time, and it was because they have a certain stigma, and I'm sure I would imagine you probably get into this a little bit in the documentary too. There was the Freddy and Jasons, and like you said, for the longest time, everybody just thought it was a different kind of class. Like Joel's wearing a Sledgehammer shirt. You know what I mean? It's like you see that.
I love shot on video stuff. So
that's going too far. But then I mean, I'll be honest with you. Like Tubi for me has been fantastic in going back and sort of retroactively experiencing all that stuff that I probably could have gotten away with renting with my parents in the '80s. I just chose not to. So I'm a late bloomer when it comes to those deeper cut slashers.
Yeah, I think part of the difference is when I was a kid, you had to go to a theater to see. I mean, I guess I was in my early teens when VHS really started to come in. But for a little while there, you had to go to a theater. You couldn't just go down to a corner store and rent this stuff. So it was a little bit harder to see. But fortunately, I discovered at the age of 14 that not every theater enforced the R rating and would let kids in without parents.
Right.
So that's when the floodgates opened. But yeah, I think the availability of video, I think that's why we have a lot of fans who kind of came to them a little later after they were made, and now with streaming, of course, you can just click a button and see whatever. So, and that's one of the reasons they endure, is because there are all these different media and venues through which you can see them and experience them and discover. And, on streaming, you can just scroll around and look at a piece of art and say, hey, that looks cool, or just even a title and check it out. So, and even back, in the 80s, when a lot of stuff was getting theatrically released, not everything would play in New York City because New York was a fairly expensive place to open a movie. So, I've discovered that a number of movies that I thought went straight to video actually would play like in the South or the Midwest or in theatrical territories where it didn't cost nearly as much to open them, especially on the drive-in circuit. So, there's a whole history of exhibition of these films too that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and of course, you being in the New York area growing up, so you obviously, and I seem to recall this from the Ad Nauseam book, that you had access to the whole grindhouse, all that whole You know, you were there. You were there, man.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the helpful thing was that right around the early '80s was when, after Halloween had done, I think it made 47 million in its first release, on a $300,000 budget, and that's when movies started playing. These kind of movies started playing theatrically, not just on Grindhouse Row or at drive-ins, but in regular hardtop theaters, both in New York City and up in the suburbs where I grew up. And it was very rare that a horror film would open in New York City just on 42nd Street. There was usually another kind of safer theater you could go to see it to. Sometimes there were exceptions. I remember I saw Boarding House on 42nd Street, and that was quite an experience.
I bet it was.
That one in a 42nd Street grindhouse. And in fact, I think that was the first time I went into I was not even living in the city at the time. That was before I went to college. I spent 4 years at film school in New York, and that's when I really just ran out and saw everything. But even then, most of the time you could go to a theater that was in a slightly safer area, because 42nd Street was pretty dangerous back at the time. But I do have some memories of seeing things like Boarding House, and I think Surf Nazis Must Die I saw on 42nd Street. So the real obscure, weird stuff. That was always kind of taking your life in your hands a little bit. But when you're young, that's kind of part of the adventure. So
yeah. And with slasher films in particular, I feel like of all the subgenres in horror, pretty much, I mean, obviously you can get really extreme, but for all the, we'll call them the normal subgenres of horror, it's probably, it doesn't matter what era you're in, because I'm old enough to remember, everything from in the 80s between, the Satanic Panic to just people freaking out over, if a kid sees the Friday the 13th movie and does something, then that's obviously the movie's fault. And so, but it's just funny because the more things change, the more they stay the same. Because I feel like it's that subgenre that's like perpetually politically incorrect. You know what I mean? And like just always has been. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things we're going to get into in Slasher Trash is kind of the furor that erupted. The two most notorious examples being Siskel and Ebert doing their whole show about slasher movies, and then the Silent Night, Deadly Night controversy when that opened, and really got into trouble because of the TV commercials even before the movie opened. They're showing these commercials when kids could see them and making them frightened of Santa. And I grew up watching Siskel and Ebert. I love watching their show. To be fair, they did like a lot of other horror films. Like Gene Siskel was one of the only critics who gave The Thing a positive review back at the time. But they just had they went on the warpath against slasher movies in particular, and that was the case in general. There were so many different kinds of horror films in the '80s, but slashers kind of defined the genre then. I think simply because they got so much attention and so much controversy, and to the average person, horror was slasher movies because those were the ones that there were headlines about. You had you had ghost movies and werewolf movies and sci-fi horror, but slashers were the ones that were making the headlines saying these movies are bad for children, they're bad for society, they should be banned, whatever. But they just kept making them for as long as they stayed profitable. When they stopped being profitable, they started making them for the direct-to-video market, where it was very easy to make a profit.
Yeah. Yeah, and I believe, if memories, I used to love watching Siskel and Ebert as well. But I what do they call them? Dead teenager pictures? Isn't that what they're? Was it that they're?
What they focused on was they said women in danger movies, because their big thing was that these are movies that present women as victims, et cetera, et cetera. Even though someone, I think, once did a survey of like all the Friday the 13th movies and found that 57% of the victims were male. So, but yeah, they just kind of. They sort of tarred a lot of these movies with the same brush, the good and the bad. They panned good stuff like My Bloody Valentine, which is a really good film. And, they always kept talking about, oh, these movies are about the murder of teenage girls. It's like, no, My Bloody Valentine is like a bunch of working class dudes and their girlfriends.
Yeah, exactly. Did you watch the movie, guys?
Exactly. And almost all of them were like, at least, the victims are at least college students, Terror Train and all those kind of movies. So... it was very easy for people to generalize back at the time, especially when they hadn't actually seen. I mean, at least Siskel and Ebert had seen all of these movies and knew what they were criticizing. He had a lot of people who just kind of went after them when they clearly had not seen them.
Yes.
And reading about them or seeing the ads or whatever.
lot of pearl clutching, a lot of like parents groups and such that I remember were big against them.
Well,
and I also seem to recall because didn't they dox Betsy Palmer as well? Wasn't that like a thing?
Gene Siskel wrote a review where he said, well, maybe, he just completely trashed Friday the 13th, gave away part of the ending, not all of it. He didn't give away Jason coming out of the lake at the end. But then he said, perhaps you should express your disapproval to the president of Paramount, and gave the Paramount address, and then said, if you want to express your displeasure to Betsy Palmer, send a letter general delivery and here's her hometown.
Jeez. So, okay, so he didn't full blown dox her, but he came close. He came close.
It's funny because people who weren't around don't remember. A lot of times, even when people were like interviewed in newspapers, they'd have their full addresses put in the article. Either Siskel or Ebert, I think it was Siskel, did a thing about going to see I Spit on Your Grave and talking to the people who were in the audience, and it's a really bizarre thing because he talked to a couple of parents who brought their little kids to see it. One of them had brought, I think, their 8 and 10-year-old daughters, and the father was like, well, I want my girls to see the world for what it is, so they know how to deal with it, and I've enrolled them in karate classes and it was the weirdest thing. But and he would have these people's full addresses, such and such whatever avenue, Chicago, and that was just a commonplace thing back then because you didn't have the internet. It wasn't as easy to harass people or whatever, but that was just kind of a commonplace thing in back in the 70s and 80s before this whole idea of like doxing and harassment and all that became a little more, unfortunately, commonplace.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I remember
the thing that always fascinated me with Siskel and Ebert, and really any critic in general. It's like, I hate to tell you, but they're not making these movies for middle-aged white dudes. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't care about your opinion. I want to hear what my, in 5th grade, I want to hear what my buddy, who's drawing Ninja Turtles and freaking Maniac Cop on his science folder. Like, I want that's the dude whose opinion I want.
Yeah. Well, because the thing was they were,
sorry, I've got wicked lag on my end. So
no, okay, no, that's fine.
Everything I just said, or vice
no, I got you. We got you. No, those sort of elite film critics. I think, there was definitely this like nose in the air, snooty, holier than thou. And always the one that always struck me as the most fascinating, because I remember Ebert really railed against I Spit on Your Grave, but he liked Last House on the Left, which I always found to be fascinating.
He actually, Ebert's probably the Main Street critic who liked the most of these things. He also gave good reviews to Dawn of the Dead and The Devil's Reject and Reanimator. It's not like he didn't like or appreciate horror films. He just, he and Siskel both found this particular subgenre to be objectionable.
Yeah.
And even then, once in a while, like they gave positive reviews to The Funhouse, as I recall, and one or two others. But they just kind of singled those out. And so for that reason, a lot of people are like, oh, those two guys hated all the horror films. And he didn't really. Well, Ebert liked a lot more than Siskel did. But,
yes.
Ebert especially was a big booster. He wrote movies for Russ Meyer, for crying out loud.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He had like that exploitation vibe going in his blood. So
I have to wonder too,
but it was interesting. Part of the thing I did for Ad Nauseam was I went back and looked up a whole bunch of reviews at the time for these films, and most of the time the reviews were what you would expect. I found some really funny ones for Silent Night, Deadly Night, where they just really went after it. But every so often I would be surprised, like Terror Train got a lot of positive reviews even back when it first came out. So once in a while, or Halloween of course did as well. So once in a while you'd get even a slasher film where some of the critics would actually find positive things to say about it. So not everybody was trashing them back at the time, but more people were going after those than any other kind of horror film. And Siskel and Ebert kind of spearheaded that, of course.
Yeah. Tyson, were you going to say something?
Well, and I was just going to say, you got to think that whatever talent you had involved in a certain project probably influenced that a little bit. Had you not had like a Gregory Peck in The Omen, you know what I mean? Do you think that if you just had a bunch of nobodies doing a great horror film, would they be inclined to, just because it's horror, give it a shit review? I was thinking about like Chuck Connors doing Tourist Trap. you know what I mean? There's got to be somebody who's it's just the rifleman. It's Chuck Connors, like automatically you're going in thinking, well, man, this has got to be really bad for me to trash this because I love Chuck Connors. You got James Caan and Kathy Bates in Misery. If they'd have cast two other people, not Academy Award winning actors, but just nobodies, then you've got a great horror film, but it's still just a horror flick. You know what I mean? I think that especially with slashers, everybody was a nobody, for the most part in slasher flicks, you know what I mean? So it's like they didn't have to worry about offending any Hollywood royalty or anything, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, every so often you'd have someone like, Glenn Ford was in Happy Birthday to Me, and this is kind of a weird example, but Leslie Nielsen is in Prom Night. At the very tail end of his serious, Airplane came out the same summer. So that was kind of the tail end of his serious acting career. But sometimes they would cast like one name actor, even in these low budget things, just to help maybe to sell it overseas or something, to say, hey, we've got a star in this film in addition to a bunch of young unknown actors. Or they would have, TV actors like Melissa Sue Anderson is in Happy Birthday to Me, who was a big TV star at the time. And there are a few others like that. So, the bigger ones could, but a lot of the other ones had no stars there. The selling point was not, you're right, it wasn't big names. It was the scares and the gore or whatever else they had in it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I heard you at the beginning mention that you're going to go back a little bit to, I don't know if you can see it. I've got the Silent Night, Evil Night version of the Black Christmas poster above my head here. So Black Christmas is my personal favorite. I love that movie. But so how far back are you going to go in the doc? Ballpark?
We probably will be going back, into the early 70s. I mean, obviously Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a seminal film, but again, that's kind of a household name movie.
Yes.
But you absolutely have to talk about Black Christmas and a few of the others that kind of set the table for Halloween to come along a few years later.
Sure.
I mean, even Last House on the Left, it's not a slasher movie per se, but it has a lot of things in common with kind of the rougher slasher films, stuff like Maniac that came out in the 80s. So we definitely are going to talk a little bit about the history of it and then really take the deep dive because there's so many movies to cover. And we're going to kind of we're going to categorize some things, like we'd like to do a whole section just on Canada because so many of these movies were made as Canadian tax shelter films. Mm-hmm. So you had a whole bunch of those coming out and all these kind of little sub themes that show up in the slasher films. We're going to kind of go off on interesting tangents to explore certain themes that happen within the slasher genre.
And how long is the overall doc going to be?
We're aiming at about 4 hours. It's going to be a big one. This is from the creator VC who did In Search of Darkness, which were real. I mean, their whole thing is let's take the real deep dive and not just make it 90 minutes, but really go for a full length thing and just explore the whole spectrum. And there's so many movies to cover. I think we can fill the 4 hours pretty easily. Yeah,
that's really cool. Tyson, do you have anything you wanted to add? I know you have a bit of a lag, so I wanted to make sure. All right, he's
No, I'm good. I'm just trying to catch what I can. Freaking fiber optic. Again, all this stuff is supposed to make life better.
Yes, well, just kidding. Okay. So we have to get into some personal questions here, Mr. Gingold. Personal. What do you have, if you don't want to say your favorite slasher movie, do you, and maybe you do, maybe you have a specific one. Do you have a favorite or do you have a favorite subgenre of the subgenre?
Subgenre within slasher movies?
Yes.
That's an interesting question. I mean, my favorite slasher is Halloween because I've said this many times. That's the one I saw when I was 12 that kind of set me on the path because it frightened me so much and yet made me love it.
Yeah.
And John Carpenter became the first director I was a fan of. The first movie person I was an idol, who was my idol, was Ray Harryhausen because I just loved his stop motion effects films. Yeah. But John Carpenter, after I saw Halloween, I just wanted to see everything John Carpenter did, which at the time, of course, was not much. I finally caught up with Assault on Precinct 13, I think a year or two after I saw Halloween. But then it was great. Growing up in the 80s, Carpenter had a movie out practically every year that decade.
Yeah.
I went to see The Fog and Escape from New York, and I went to see The Thing, and I was so kind of devastated that it was such a box office failure because I didn't catch up with it till fairly late in its run, and I was thought this movie's great. Why is no one going to see this movie?
Yeah.
So yeah, Halloween is still, that's the go-to. That's still my favorite. I watch it at least once every couple of years on Halloween again. And it's great. It gets revived in theaters all the time. So it's great to go see it, and especially in the new restorations that they've done. I remember I introduced at Alamo Drafthouse in Yonkers a new restoration. I think it was 4K of Halloween up on the big screen. And I'll always remember there's the scene where Donald Pleasance and Charles Cyphers are talking on the street, and then Cyphers leaves, and you see Michael in the car pull up in the background and then kind of turns and drives off.
Mm-hmm.
The 4K is so sharp, you can see that there is actually an actor wearing Michael's mask driving the car, and you can see him look both ways before he turns. Michael doesn't look both ways.
Yeah.
He drives.
Michael's a safe driver.
He's speeding past the girls, and they speed girls.
Yeah.
I guess he took notes.
Yeah.
But, I figured Michael wouldn't even stop. He'd just tear into that intersection. He doesn't care. But
or is it actually so Machiavellian and clever that he knew that being that there were police nearby, he had to make sure he didn't draw any attention whatsoever to his driving?
That could be it. He saw Donald Pleasance there and said, "Oh, I better be careful." And
yeah, it's just look
it
both
was so
ways.
great to, like, be able to see that tiny little detail that I never noticed before, because I've seen Halloween probably a few dozen times now.
Yeah,
but seeing new details in it is always fun.
I had a similar experience with Halloween. I want to say it was in 2018 because I think it was right before the 2018 requel, whatever you want to call it, came out. And they showed the original. I had never seen it on the big screen. So I was like, well, I'm going to go see this on the big screen. And things about it jumped out at me that I had never, I don't know why, probably because all the times I'd seen it on VHS or on TV or whatever, on smaller TVs especially, growing up, I just never noticed just little moments, like you said, like that, like just those kind of details. I mean, that's more of a almost like a borderline behind the scenes thing. But there was, I know it seems so obvious in hindsight. Like now I always see it, but I think it was when Annie first goes into the laundry room and the way the door, closes by, and there's like a split second where you can see Michael way, almost in the background, through the window
on the side. Yeah.
It's super soft. And I had never, until I saw on the big screen, never noticed that. Big screen, I was like, oh my God. It's like, and I knew that whole scene was always suspenseful, but obviously that, amps it up significantly when you see that Michael is right there. So, no, I'm with you. I love Halloween. And you'll be happy to know everyone I ever talk to so my sons, I have an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 15-year-old. I showed them Halloween for the first time a couple years ago, and they love it. And love it. And it's funny because my 17-year-old, he specifically, they have since I kind of jumped them around. They've seen Halloween 4 because I'm sort of a sucker for Halloween 4. Plus, I think it's got the greatest autumnal opening just about of any movie ever. Just it feels so perfectly Halloween and fall. But they also had seen the 2018 version, and they didn't hate it or anything, but they really came back it doesn't hold a candle. They were all, it's just, you think kids wouldn't feel because it's slower and it doesn't have much blood. No, they totally appreciated Carpenter's craftsmanship with that movie. I was very proud of them.
Oh, cool. And you bring up a really good point, which is, people growing up in the VHS era watching these movies, that was before letterboxing. Mm-hmm. So if you watched Halloween on VHS for years and years, you were seeing a cropped picture. Yep. I'm not sure if they pan and scanned it or how they treat it. I haven't seen it on VHS in a long, long time. But, you were only getting about half the picture.
Yeah.
That you got when you saw it in a theater. So you would lose details like that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the great things about the Blu-ray and DVD revolution is finally you could watch a movie like Halloween at home and get the full picture.
Sure.
The VHS generation, did not get the full picture. Yep. So that's also part of the history is people rediscovering these films and seeing when you had a director like Carpenter who really knew how to use the widescreen frame, and you could really appreciate it and get scared by it. Because like you said, seeing Michael way off on this, because there's a bunch of shots in Halloween where Michael's way off on the edge of the frame. And so seeing it, so there's really kind of no comparison watching a movie like that on VHS in the old days to seeing it wide on the big screen.
For sure. And it's interesting because that's a good point. growing up, I had only ever seen it on, my 4:3, CRT type of television. And, it was playing on network TV or whatever. So it's even edited for TV there. And when I would have been the most engaged, right? So when you first see those movies, that's when you're the most locked in because you've never seen it before. So the first several times I see it, it's like that. It's on VHS. So years past, I've got it on Blu-ray, and that's what was really struck me. I'm like, why did I notice this? Something that because most likely watching it on Blu-ray, because I've also seen it at, an untold number of times, you take it for granted. You don't pay as close attention. You're getting distracted. You're looking away. You're eating your dinner. You know what I'm saying? So you look down. You're not locked in. Whereas when I'm finally seeing it on the big screen, I'm locked in. So it was a really cool experience, and I recommend any movie. Same thing with Jaws. There's several movies that growing up, I would never gotten to see it that's on the big screen, and just go back. And The Thing, I'd never gotten to see that on the big screen when I was a kid. So it played. It was a few years back, like Fathom or somebody put it out, and I took my kids to see that as well. I was like, oh, you guys have got to see The Thing. The Thing rules. Yeah, man. No, I'm right there with you. So yeah, I guess we lost Tyson. I probably should have addressed the elephant in the room. I'm thinking his internet just went. But at least he got to ask you a couple questions, because I wanted to make sure he was here, but not least of which because he co-hosts this channel with me, but also because I know he's such a massive slasher guy. Before we wrap anything up, I want to make sure we tell everybody slashertrashdoc.com, right? That's the domain that they can go to. Tell them about that. Tell them where they can get what they can get if they help support it.
Well, when is this going to be airing?
I could drop it as soon as you want. I could drop it today. I could drop it tomorrow.
Because we're on the 14th. We're the very last day of our last crowdfunding. I don't remember exactly what time. But if you're listening,
I think it said 18 hours. It said right before we started. I think it still said like 18 hours were left.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this on the 14th, maybe late into the evening, go and check out our crowdfunding. We've got we've got the Blu-ray and all kinds of merch to offer for people who contribute. And then just keep an eye. Slasher Trash obviously has a big Facebook presence. We have presences elsewhere online. Just keep an eye on the website and social media, and we will be posting a lot of updates as we go along.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and just the trailer is great. I don't know who you guys got to do the voice for the trailer, but that was perfect.
Yeah, I don't know his name either, but he definitely had absolutely the voice for that.
It was the tone, because you hear a lot of people trying to recreate that Mr. Voice trailer vibe, but that one I was like, bro would have fit right in. That was perfect. I highly recommend it. Go check out the site. Go check out the trailer. Like I said, have procured the collector's edition Blu-ray thing there. Yeah, so I'm happy to support it. Looks like a lot of fun. And I got to be honest with you. I don't know how many people like fanboy out on you, but I'm legit like, it's cool. It's just cool. Like somebody you grew up, reading their work and following them, and we're always aware of their name. There's like a handful of guys in the Fangoria family that is just really cool to meet you in person. Well, relatively speaking,
This is how people do these days. So
yes, exactly. So really an honor to have you here on the channel. And again, everybody go check out slashertrashdoc.com. And Mike, is there anywhere else you want to send them to find your other stuff? Or
well, the one thing I want to give a little plug to is I have a book coming out soon called Armies of the Night, which is all about the Warriors. Another movie from the 70s that was very controversial for what was perceived as its violence, even though it's not a very violent film, or not a very graphically violent film. Yeah. So that's coming out from 1984 Publishing in October. You can pre-order on Amazon or at 1984publishing.com. That's the big one. And, I'm also still doing featurettes for Blu-rays. Right now I'm wrapping up a locations featurette on Night of the Juggler, which is an amazing, bizarre, sleazy 80s action movie for Radiance Films for their upcoming Blu-ray. So I've got my hands in a few things right now.
Very cool. Very cool. And what I'll do is I will get the links to all that and put them in the description, and I will drop that. I will drop this pretty much shortly after we've recorded it. So there should be enough time. If anybody sees this, and again, as you said, the 14th, go help support the doc. Especially if you're a slasher fan.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks very much for having me and for giving me a chance to share this with your listeners.